A well-dressed young man ties one end of a rope around a rock, then another to his waist, and carries the rock around the country until he arrives near a huge well. From his pocket, he takes something out and observes it with watery eyes. With a decisive, almost automatic motion, he throws the rock down into the well and follows it. To his misfortune, though, he wakes up in the middle of the desert, saved by the group of ascetics. He is told that if one tries to run away from life, then one must come back and partake in another one. To continue one's journey is the rule of the game. So as they walk away, he stands up and follows them. He warms himself by their fire and sleeps alongside them. Going through rough terrain and cities, he has to regain the will to be alive. We go back 9 years to see where it all started. A bus is followed by two young men riding a bike. One of them is a shock. The road isn't much of a concern for them, and their eyes only follow a passenger on a bus, a girl named Rina that is so beautiful and elegant to them. In the following scene, they are parked, sitting, and waiting for the girl to come down from the bus. Ashok tries to assure his companion, Bobby, that the girl he's so eager to tempt will never fall for her. He doesn't have enough force of gravity to draw the attention of such a creature. And as they discuss the physics lesson about how even people have a force of gravity, the girl descends. Now Ashok encourages Bobby to go up and propose to her, or if that's not possible, then just try to make friends with her, so that the power of gravity will have a chance to manifest itself on its own. So, encouraged by this, Bobby starts walking towards her, bravely and fiercely, until his legs get heavy and he freezes in one place. The gravity of the girl seems to be too scary for him to get close to, so he gets back to Ashok, who tells him that this is no true love, this is just an effect that the girl has. So he proves his point. Ashok goes home after school and right away gets to study mathematics by heart, repeating a formula mistakenly, while his brother learns history, repeating the same date over and over again till it's well engraved on his brain. Ashok needs mathematics for the IIT exams, and his brother is preparing for the IAS exams. When their eldest brother hears this insensate chanting, he bursts into the room and scolds both of them, telling Ashok that 1 divided by cot C equals sexy rather than sexy. But to no avail, so he concludes that this country is predestined to fail in the hands of such youth. The next day, Ashok and his best friend are again going after the bus, getting closer this time and throwing a love letter at the girl. The first time Bobby tries, he is unsuccessful, but after Ashok attempts to start another physics lecture, he lets him throw another one. This time it gets inside, but unfortunately, it passes the girl and lands near a mustachioed man, who picks it up. The man turns out to be her father, so once he reads the first lines, he rushes to the window, raging like a bull. He throws the letter at the boys and threatens them with his last words. Then, breathing heavily, he goes back inside and turns to his daughter this time, shouting at her to correct her dress. His sister tries to protect her and accuses him of this occasion. If he's so concerned, then he should fix her a wedding rather than throw a temper at her whenever a single boy gathers up the courage to go up to her. However, as it seems, the girl's wedding was fixed in her childhood, and it didn't work out. So the father continues to gossip about Ashok and how he's a disgrace to his older brother, the chief of the RSS of the city. Next, Ashok and Bobby are on a rooftop, now discussing Ashok's love life while his brother does yoga in the background. Bobby teases and laughs at him, calling him brother-in-law and eventually settling down to accumulate a plan. But Ashok says that his love for the girl that he knows from his childhood is never going to blossom. He begins telling a story, and we are transported to the past. He's 8 years old, and a bad drought is raging in his village. Villagers say that he is the one to blame, an unlucky child. They want to throw him out of the village, but his father does everything to prevent this from happening. He tells everyone that he has gold buried near his house, and he offers to dig a huge well to find this gold so that everyone in this village has free water to drink. So they start digging but find nothing. Eventually, before the protest arises once more, Ashok's grandfather tells everyone that the whole village is sinful, and all are responsible for the drought, but his word is cut by a man with a mustache, the one we said before. He tells everybody that Ashok cannot be an unlucky child and offers to wed their children for good fortune. So, Reena remains with them until the gold is found, and then they will finally be married. But the gold is still nowhere to be found, and the drought continues. Now the whole village is enraged, and his grandfather's honor is trampled down, so the latter tries to but is saved by his son. None of the villagers care for the grandfather though, they only need gold, so they call a tantric, and the tantric gives them a solution. It seems that someone must bury himself, and after 3 days he will return with gold. But no one is willing to bury himself, and the whole village turns its back on Ashok's family, which has already started to divide. Meanwhile, Reena tells Ashok that they will never be a wife and husband since the water will never be found. But for now, she considers him her husband. Shockingly, as she considers Ashok her husband, she does as he says. He tells her to so that the gold will be found and the well will be made with it. The village kids try to bury her, and the word about this reaches Ashok's grandfather very soon. Meanwhile, Ashok regrets his actions and tries to help Reena get free, but he can't, and he swiftly rushes away to get a shovel. Before he's back, the grandfather arrives at the crime scene. He approaches her and helps her out, but before she's completely free, the villagers come running across the sand and see everything from a very different perspective. They call him the demon that tries to his daughter-in-law, and on a village council, they decide to exile Ashok with his whole family. As for the marriage arrangement, Ashok and Reena will only marry when Ashok finally brings water to the village, so they are separated. With that, the story ends, and we are transported back to the rooftop, where Bobby suggests he just build a well. But Ashok knows that he must first complete his exams, then earn an enormous fortune, and only then will he be able to provide water for his folks and marry Reena. Suddenly, he sees an advertisement for a motivational speakers show, so they go to attend. The man there is greeted as a true superstar, shining amongst the spectators like a jewel as he ascends the stage to say that being an IIT is only their family's dream and not theirs. He tells them about chain marketing and pitches the idea of starting a new business on your own. An American company called KISSMLM will help them complete their dream, and the only thing that they will have to do is pay 80 rupees and gather as many members as they can for more commission from the company. The motivational speaker does his job perfectly. Everybody's plans are changed in an instant. Financial freedom is all Ashok wants, so at night he gets his brother's savings, and the next morning he and Bobby are welcomed into the company. The man tells them not to give up and to work hard, then goes away. So they start pitching the membership, going door to door. A witless fanatic and a woman with a weirdly deep voice were trying to seduce Ashok, but no one is particularly interested in the membership. In the following scene, Reena arrives at the branch office to meet the branch head, but the security officer only laughs at their attempt to just come by and meet him. Moving forward, it seems like Ashok and Bobby have a plan. There's a birthday of a member of the royal family, Raj Singh or Bana. He slowly makes his way among the people who are gathered to celebrate and makes a small speech. The party starts swiftly, and we see Ashok and Bob come into view. They sneakily join the party as if they are here only to dance and have fun, and dance their way through the crowd to meet Raj. Eventually, they get to him, and Ashok offers him a present. He wants to offer to give Ashok something in return. However, they start to pitch the idea of Kiss MLM, telling him that it would be a gift for the whole city. They convey the ideas of an American company that is slowly entering the Indian economy. On this wonderful day, they want to explore this new horizon with him, but their lousy presentation is cut short. Suddenly, Bana's mother calls him from upstairs and stops this whole mess, talking down on him like a child, telling him how the other king would have been married several times by now, and instead, how he parties with the lower people. She demands that this mess be cleared immediately, so the whole house empties. The boys start to follow the stream of people too, but the king, changed by this occasion, stops them and receives the offering. They ride the bike back, talking about where Ashok's first salary will go. And in the next scene, Ashok visits his grandfather. He tells him that this time he's not empty-handed, and he will get the best story out of him. So, the grandfather takes some rough cut stones one by one and tells a story according to the scenes carved on their surfaces. It's the story of Bajarath. It's the same as the story of their family and the story of Ashok. Bajarath eventually receives an otherworldly favor and gets water for his village. However, when the story ends, Ashok is surprisingly not pleased. No wife is mentioned in the story. The grandfather says that Bajarath had to choose between love and the village. Eventually, Ashok gives him a portion of the money he made and is encouraged to be better than Bajarath and achieve both of his goals, finally get the girl of his childhood dreams and end the drought that has been tormenting his villages for ages. He goes to Reena's university and sees her walking through the corridors, failing to even notice him, while Ashok remembers their past friendship and the childish story of their betrothal. But eventually, he gathers the courage to talk to her. She clearly doesn't remember him. So, trembling and stuttering, Ashok tries to remind her, but eventually, he only gives out a small present. While that's happening, Reena's boyfriend, sitting in his car, slides into view and calls for her, so she awkwardly returns the gift she just received and they drive away. In the following city, Bobby and Ashok are on a ridge overlooking the city, talking about Reena's boyfriend and his car, cursing their poverty. Suddenly, Ashok, as if he got some divine encouragement, stands up and shouts at the city and all its citizens who take the safe path that he will take the risk and climb out of the distasteful pit of poverty. So, they return to the city to hunt some more. They approach a young man named Swapnil, seemingly of their age, standing in the long queue to pay fees for his coach, and steal him away. They enthusiastically pitch the idea of becoming a member of KISS MLM to this young man, who has been paying taxes for over 3 years, a frustratingly high number. A newborn child needs exactly that much time to become a 3-year-old, as Bobby says, trying to tempt him to join, even mentioning Newton and his theories to help their cause and eventually convince him to become the first member. And so they continue roaming the city for days, talking to all kinds of people in all kinds of environments, even doing something for them in exchange from time to time, receiving a bunch of rejections, but also a ton of acceptance, until the number of their members is considerable. But unfortunate events soon follow. Riena's relationship continues. And at night, on the same ridge overlooking the city, when Bobby and Ashok are drinking their sorrow away, their first member arrives from the darkness with ill intentions, stating that they ruined his life and now they are drinking his money away. The money they took from him was for his coach, helping him to become an IIT, but now he has lost the chance to be chosen at last and has lost all his money from their scheme. They manage to calm him down and ask him how much money his father usually gives him. It seems like it's her mother's money, who's a maid, and this new information gives the tipsy boys another chance to shame him for forcing his mother to be a maid, rather than taking a risk and collecting wealth sensibly. They go too far, calling him useless for everything, until the boy sulks and turns away to hide his tears, questioning his existence and the purpose of his being. Slowly approaching the edge of the ridge as Ashok and Bobby continue to laugh at his helplessness, he eventually goes too far and jumps. The boys turn away now to discover what happened, and frightened by this occasion, rush down to find him. In the following scene, they take Swapnil to the hospital, afraid that it's all their fault. As they are waiting silently outside, suddenly Ashok hears that somebody is pitching the idea of Kiss MLM, so he stands up and walks towards the sound, trampling along the blacktop and attacking the man who's speaking. As Bobby tries to break them apart, the man flees, threatening that he's one of Bana's men and they messed with the wrong guy. Bobby seems wary, and Ashok pushes him too. He realizes that they tried so hard to be men, that they forgot how to be human. They ruined so many lives with their foolishness and lies, and now it's enough. This is the point where it needs to stop. They spend the night in the hospital, spending all their money on Swapnil's treatment, and in the morning Ashok decides that they must pay his coaching fees at any price too. So, Bobby proposes to add 2 more members so that they can pay Swapnil's fees and return the money to Ashok's brother. But before he can even consider this plan, they both are captured by Bana's men and taken somewhere in the king's palace. They tie them in a small courtyard where people are being tortured and whipped. The king enters the courtyards, telling them that this American business has polluted the city, and that this process ends now. In the following scene, they are tied to rocks, half naked, with some other people. Ashok sits up and takes a look around the uninhabited meadow. He unties himself, then helps Bobby, and they discuss their future in front of the branch head, chanting that he was about to make a seminar, and that he was successfully collecting new members, but now even his car is taken from him. So, Ashok reckons that they run the seminar themselves in secret and take his car. In the following scene, we see Riina talking to her sister about Ashok. She's desperate, thinking she'll never find him. To our surprise, it seems like she still remembers everything and struggles to get over Ashok. On the bus, she discusses with her sister how she's been searching for him for years. She has no idea that it was Ashok who proposed to her. But her father is standing in her way, so her sister offers an idea. They could start a pretend survey and go to his house. So, in the following scene, they arrive there. Ashok's brother, who's not so bright, comes down to meet them and answers their questions. Eventually, he goes inside to fetch their family photo, and when he shows it to Riina, her eyes shine with a sudden acknowledgement that Ashok is in the city, trying to get her back. They turn back, and now all they have to do is go to Ashok and end this confusing search. Meanwhile, Ashok and Bobby are in the stolen car, reassuring themselves that they'll return it right up until Ashok's brother finds out. Suddenly, they see Bana driving by, and they crouch until he passes. But, to their he stops with his companions. It seems like they recognize the car. Bana is mildly dissatisfied. So, the whole chorus of bikes comes after them. They must come up with a plan. They must get to the seminar or else the IIT will die. So, Ashok proposes that he will serve as a decoy. He comes out of the car and goes another way. Bana's people divide too and follow both. Ashok runs through the narrow streets until he reaches a bridge. He closes the door behind Bana and his men and runs away. He is safe now, and he can run the seminar. There, he once again talks about the Kiss MLM and how it changed his whole life, helping him repay his debts and get the girl of his dreams. So, in the end, he says that he'll go to her now. And so he does. In the following scene, he and Bobby go to meet Riina. They change seats, even though he doesn't know how to drive, and wait until she passes by. Meanwhile, Riina and her sister notice Ashok sitting in the car. The sister encourages her to go to him and just tell him that she'll be his wife, as the people start gathering around to see the owner of this magnificent car. The car is in neutral, so Ashok pushes down on the throttle to seem more graceful. But cars and driving aren't one of his strengths. Suddenly, it darts off and smashes into a stall. People run towards them. His eldest brother is one of them. He takes him out and beats him in front of the students. But from all the people, Riina's gaze stings the most. Ashok is embarrassed. He throws one last look toward Riina and runs away without looking back. And so, 7 years go by. Bobby is a computer repairman now. He and his family are about to arrange the marriage for him, so they arrive at the door of the bride's family. Bobby asks his father in despair to say that he's a hardware engineer, and they knock on the door. As the door opens, Bobby is startled. Riina's father is standing in front of them. They enter the home and sit down in the living room. Reena's father notices the scared and baffled look on Bobby's face and takes another good glance at him. Suddenly, and to Bobby's terror, he says that he remembers him from somewhere. He gets lost in words, but his father helps him out by saying that his son fixes computers, and probably that's why his face is so recognizable. Bobby is relieved but still tries to convince Reena's family that he's a hardware engineer. This is when Reena and her sister come into the room, serving coffee. Bobby tries desperately to hide his face, but eventually, Reena's sister asks him mockingly if he will stop throwing letters at girls. But it doesn't start any discussion, so the mother tells Reena to show Bobby her room. They sit in awkward silence, and clearly, the romantic TV program that Bobby switched to in desperation doesn't help at all. Eventually, he manages to switch to another channel. Reena wants to say something, but she seems to be unable to find the words, so Bobby tells her about Ashok, how he ran away 7 years ago, and nobody knows where he is today. It's unfortunate for her since her father is searching for a partner for her, and soon enough there will be no chance of her and Ashok's reunion. When Bobby hears that her father is searching for her potential husband, he begins to skip about in his seat. He tried to flirt with her and win her heart, but right away, as if judging his treasonous act, the news started on TV, saying that somebody stabbed his friend in the back. To their surprise, the news is about Ashok. It seems like he befriended Ahmedabad's tile king Naku Desai and defrauded him of 3 million rupees. Naku himself is saying that to save the Indian tile industry, he trusted Ashok and invested in his idea, but in the end, he proved to be a fraud. Next, Bana is discussing his marriage with his mother when Bobby and Reena arrive, asking for 3 million rupees. The mother asks them if they are married. The answer is no, and the women go to another room to fetch the money, leaving Bobby with Bana, who suddenly breaks his silence, asking Bobby if they'd met before. Flashing through time, Bobby, Reena, and her sister arrive in Ahmedabad to visit Ashok in prison. Reena, anxious to meet him after all this time, is afraid to go inside as Bobby embraces him. Eventually, their eyes meet, and she fails to look at him for a long time. In the following scene, they are sitting around the table, talking. Finally, Ashok reveals why he ran, and as he tells the story, we are transported back in time. He was so embarrassed by his brother that he decided to go far away and only return when he had enough wealth to fulfill his grandfather's dream and marry Reena. First, he becomes a salesman in a tile shop, and over time he becomes competent in that field. But this is not the end of his journey. After some time, he begins working on designs too, and eventually comes up with one that will earn him billions. He plans to start his own business with it, so he invests all his money in it, but soon the market fails and all the workers go on strike. His investment is gone now, and the only man he can go to is the tile king, Jagat Shah. This is the only man who has a contract with Chinese industry, which is destroying the Indian economy. But his conscience seems clear, as he thinks that business doesn't run on emotions, it runs on profit. On the other hand, Ashok has a design that will prove to be a great competitor against the imported product. But he only needs an investor, so he meets with Jagat Shah, who says that he'll test it and tell him the answer later. However, he waits, and the answer is delayed. As it turns out, he's weaving insidious plans to blackmail Chinese investors and tell them that their Indian project will fail if he starts manufacturing Ashok's design. Meanwhile, Ashok turns to another Indian manufacturer, Mr. Desai, who likes the product and invests in it. However, the patent is already Jagat Shah's at this point, and Ashok and Desai are accused of stealing the design. So now, Desai thinks that he betrayed him, and Ashok feels helpless. All the efforts prove futile for him, he says, but Bobby reassures him that they will return the money to Desai and he will withdraw the case. This is unexpected for him, and before they can talk more about it, their visit is over. Everybody stands up and leaves, but only Reena stays behind as if gravity were pulling her back to Ashok. He asks her if she's married and receives the wittiest and most joy-giving answer, only in childhood. So, he now knows that Reena is waiting for him, and all the desperation swiftly goes away. They convince Desai to withdraw the case, and at last, Ashok and Reena, now free and ready to start a new life, embrace each other firmly. They are excited to fulfill the rest of their dreams as if nothing can get in their way anymore. Now that they are together, happiness is at hand. However, once they get back to their city, Bobby and Reena discover that her father and Bana are having a meeting. Bana is congratulating something as they enter the room. And as the father calls Bobby his future son-in-law, Bana understands that they lied to him. Angry and dishonored by this, he tells Reena's father how she borrowed 3 million rupees from him and proposes 2 solutions. Either they pay him back in 3 days or engage Reena with him. Feeling powerful, Bana takes Bobby somewhere to deal with him now, and the scene is cut. Ashok is trying to convince Mr. Desai that he didn't betray him. But this whole matter doesn't interest him anymore. He realizes now that the business isn't his job and tries to convince Ashok, as well, to quit and go back to being a salesman. In the following scene, everyone is waiting for the priest. The engagement is at hand when Ashok enters the yard and attempts to stop all this, stating that this girl is his wife. The chaos breaks, and eventually, Ashok convinces everybody that he can get money in 30 days. However, if he is unable to deliver that amount on time, then Bana can marry Reena. Unexpectedly, even Reena supports this idea. She knows that he will do it, and she trusts his words. The next day, Ashok visits his grandfather after almost a decade. The old man is about to tell another one of his stories carved on stones, but Ashok stops him, regarding all of his stories as mere lifeless stones, but the grandfather assures him otherwise. These are not mere stones, these are gold from his perspective, a property entrusted to him by his ancestors. It's all about the perspective, he says, and then these strange, spell-like words spark an idea in Ashok's head. He calls Desai again and meets him, telling him that his design will surely work because of its low price. Desai knows this, but his answer is still no since his factories are sealed. However, Ashok has an answer to this objection too. They only sell the front doors, and they can sneak from behind. Ashok is trying hard to convince him, but to no avail, so at last he confesses that his wife is on stake, and this confession reminds Desai of the word gamble. A wave of compassion hits Desai, and in the end, he agrees. They start the business all over again, and after some time, the tiles are ready to go. The Chinese business grows more wary day by day until Jagat Shah decides that this boy must be stopped at any cost as swiftly as possible. So that night they raided the factory, arresting all the workers and Desai. The next day, he assures Reena that he will not let anything happen to her, that he will be coming with the money. However, after hanging up, Bobby calls him right away, telling him desperately what happened yesterday, leaving him baffled and hopeless in the middle of the presentation hall. A month has passed in the next scene, and Ashok enters the yard where everybody's gathered once more. As he steps inside, Reena runs to him and hugs him desperately, pleading for escape. But as Bana's men take the bag that he brought, we discover that the money isn't enough. He hopelessly tries to get some more time, but the royal family will have no more. It's not about the money anymore. Bana slowly approaches the couple entangled with each other and demands that the girl come with him. Ashok is powerless, he finds himself unable to let her go. But finally, Reena tells him that they will always be husband and wife, but now he must run away. She cries out, opening her heart to him and saying that after all this time he dug her up once more. She is powerless, unable to move, but at last, they break apart and Reena exits the yard. And so we are returned to where we started. It turns out that all this is a story that Ashok tells about an elderly man living in a hut in the middle of nowhere after attempting to take the easy way out. He tells the old man about the peace he feels here. He plans to stay here forever, away from the misfortunes of life and away from the place where he's regarded as a bad omen. But these words have the opposite effect on the man. Suddenly, he jumps up, enlightened by these words, and says that he used to be just like him, and this house proved to be just another obstacle in his way. After the story of human love and struggle and affection, he feels that he must rejoin the river of life once more. And so, he takes a torch and sets the whole den on fire. Ashok watches for a while and then does the same, deciding that after failing to fulfill his family's dream and after failing to be the best fit for somebody, he wants to have a life for himself, to rejoin the wheel of life. So he lets the flames devour the picture of Reena. They dance near the fire, but after a while, the old man disappears, and we realize that Ashok was talking to himself in the future. A few days later, he is sitting with a man named Prahlad and Bobby. He wants to fulfill his dream now and the dream of many Indians whose lives were ruined by the Chinese industry. His tiles are indeed seized by the police, but Prahlad assures him not to worry about that. His tiles will be launched on the same day as the Chinese mosaic. The only thing he has to do is prepare for the presentation and make a good impression. Prahlad starts the campaign to make sure Ashok's product overthrows the Chinese one. Time flies quickly, and the launch day comes. First, Jagat Shah comes in front of the audience. He starts by saying that his industry is about to spread further in Asia and asks his Chinese companion, Zhang Wu, to continue after him. The latter introduces their basic mosaic, convinced that it's invincible. After the presentation, the journalists ask Jagat about his take on Indian design, and he answers cynically, saying that he hopes he won't see his product stolen again. In the following scene, we see Ashok ascending the stage slowly. He starts talking about the struggle that Indian people have and the difficulties that they have to overcome daily. He knows about them, and their dream is his dream. Their economy is failing, and he is eager to breathe some life into it by motivating his people to make their own products. As he speaks, the eyes pointed at him light up, and the Chinese investors squirm nervously. At last, he says that he'll let the walls of houses speak of the stories that his grandfather used to tell and present his new design of wall tiles, inspired by his grandfather's ancient stories. The whole audience gasps and claps, and as the whole audience stands up for Ashok, the Chinese investor cancels the contract with Jagat Shah. Ashok avoids the journalists and hugs Prahlad, the man who made all this possible. They won, and so now Ashok can accumulate enough wealth to help make a well in his village. In the following scene, they find wet sand. A few feet more and they will have water. The dream of Ashok's family will be finally fulfilled. He tells this news to his grandpa, who seems weaker and nearer to death. From their conversation, we understand that Ashok feels like a failure only in one area: he was unable to marry. And so, his grandfather spills out one last piece of wisdom. He is no failure. Winning and losing is the least important. Life is a game and it must be played. What's yours will be yours no matter what. It is called destiny. And as if the world listened, destiny presented itself to Ashok through the face of Reena. Suddenly, a car arrived at the village, and she came out with Bana. As they stand in front of him, the man opens his heart to her, saying that he had taken an oath never to get married and that it was a sin to take her with him. But now he realizes his mistake and returns her, blesses them, and leaves. Ashok looks at Reena for a while, laughing from the sudden burst of happiness, and then embraces her as the water bursts out from the ground nearby. So, like this, in a blink of an eye, two of his dreams are fulfilled at once.